Adam Kinzinger, thanks so much for taking the time.
Of course, it's an honor. Good to be with you.
Perhaps I just want to start out here because, of course, I one of the main things that I like to talk about with my guests, specifically those who were very deeply involved in sort of the Republican movement, and now just to kind of get their perspective on where things are headed. I've spoken to people that are in similar shoes, such as yourself, people like Joe Walsh, a number of different times. Both of you are former congressional representatives. I mean, I'm just curious. Of course, Donald Trump now, out of all of the primaries that we've seen on the Republican side, it's looking like there's a smaller and smaller chance that Nikki Haley will have any chance at actually being victorious. What are your thoughts as it relates to what the overall shift in the Republican Party means for the future of the party?
Well, for the future of the party, it's really bad. I mean, I think, look, the thing that attracted me to the Republican Party, I started paying attention to politics when I was 6 years old, for goodness sakes, is what I loved was the understanding of the Republicans that, America played a special role in the world and that our role was important and that democracy was important. And I don't have to repeat this, but it goes without saying that's been really flushed down the toilet by the Republican Party. So I think the future is as a party that is very populist. I don't think it's a conservative party. And I think what's going to happen is either it will crash and burn, and then, I don't know, a new Republican Party will come up in its place, or there will be some version of a conservative movement that comes along and replaces it. Because there has to be a conservative movement in this country. And I would argue that right now, the Republican Party certainly does not represent a conservative movement by any means.
And I mean, one of the things that interested me in particular was like the leaked messages, for example, of people like Tucker Carlson, where he was, he would be saying one thing on the air and then privately be saying something completely different. And, there are people like, again, I said Joe Walsh just because I'm kind of fascinated by the connection between the two of you, I guess. But just like, for example, whenever I talk to him, tells me he doesn't believe that the Republican Party is a viable option, even if it is fixed, just because of the fact that all of the people that make up the party right now have been consistently aligning themselves with Donald Trump. Do you think there is any degree where it can come back, where the people who are in the Republican Party can, I guess, be restored to kind of the traditional values that you mentioned are obviously what attracted you to join the party?
Well, look, I think the vast majority of Republican voters are influenceable. Mean, really, the point of want you to do. Otherwise, I mean, that's not leadership at all. That's just trying to get elected. Leaders can influence people's viewpoints. And I would argue, look, Donald Trump has been very influential in the GOP. I mean, there are people that are saying and doing things now. Marco Rubio is an example that I never thought would say or do half of the stuff they're saying now. So I think it's possible that a inspirational kind of future focused, optimistic person could come along and change the nature of the GOP, particularly a next generation figure. But it's a lot of damage that's been done, and it's going to take a lot to fix that. It's interesting. Joe Walsh, for instance, he and I'm not sure if he got into this, but we were mortal rivals in the House. I mean, he was this Freedom Caucus guy. I was this moderate Republican. We were both from Illinois. But now, obviously, we're friends and we found common cause in what we're fighting for. So anything can change. But I think as long as Donald Trump is around and as long as there are people that are willing to take his mantle after he's gone, we're going to be in a pretty bad situation for the Republican Party, not as Americans necessarily, but certainly as Republicans.
And I mean, obviously, the primary in many regards is essentially over. I mean, Nikki Haley is campaigning, but there was the, reference made to the fact that in Nevada, she lost to none of the above and to that option. So people kind of questioning what her future is as it relates to her campaign. Donald Trump, in many ways, people believe will be the nominee, obviously. So I guess my question here is just from what we saw over the course of the campaign, like you mentioned something kind of like a next generation perspective. I interviewed Vivek Ramaswamy a number of times over the course of the campaign, which I guess he was seen, at least by people in the Republican Party, as kind of that next generation voice. And so those who are in the party really liked it. But even he, at least, it seems, was, couldn't say a bad thing about Donald Trump. And so I guess in terms of policy, because a lot of these people doesn't necessarily seem as if their policy is all that different from, the policy of the Republican Party from, 2012 or what have you. So I guess what is kind of the shift in the Republican Party? Is it more policy based from your perspective, or is it, what many other people are saying, the fact that, it's more of a character thing?
Look, I hate to put it this way, but the party's become a cult. And, at a moment where people feel, and we know this after COVID particularly, people feel very isolated. They feel lonely. A lot of people now find their friends online, which is not a great way to get that, personal interaction you need. And so what's happened is people have turned in this country to politics to fill that need to belong, to fill that need to be part of something. And when you vested your entire social circle into politics, look, I've come to believe that people fear more than they fear death. They fear being kicked out of their tribe. They fear losing that social connection. And so when people have made their social connection politics, it becomes very hard to say the truth when saying the truth is going to get you kicked out of the tribe. Look at me, look at Liz Cheney, look at Joe Walsh. Just telling the truth, not changing what we believe, gets you kicked out of the tribe. So then people come along the lines and belong. So I don't think there's been a huge change in policy, although I can point to Russia, I can point to, a whole bunch of things that the Republican Party's gone off the rails on. But I think the depth of it is people have found their identity in republicanism or conservatism, and it doesn't actually mean what it stands for. The only thing that you have to do is follow what this leader, who happens to be insane, I think, tells them to believe.
And I mean, I want to get your take too on the upcoming election. I spoke to Carrie Lake a little while ago, who obviously is closely aligned to Donald Trump. And one of the things I found interesting, without even mentioning it myself, she had brought up the fact that in some way the 2020 election was, quote, was rigged against Donald Trump. And so when I tried to push back on that and ask her about it, she, went on this, long rant talking about how I was a horrible journalist for asking about it. So anyways, it was a fairly interesting conversation to say the least. But I mean, it kind of made me question to a broader degree, like, where does the Republican Party go after there is no Donald Trump, given, people like Carrie Lake who are just consistently and constantly backing Donald Trump up, even, no matter what it is. And even in some cases, it seems like it can be kind of the most outrageous things possible. So, I mean, I guess I'm just curious, as we head into 2024, what are the Republicans going to do, specifically Republicans who aren't comfortable with the type of rhetoric that's being pursued? Is the most viable option to turn to Democrats? Because a lot of Republicans probably wouldn't be happy with that themselves either.
Well, this is going to be what the next 9 months is going to determine. My viewpoint is this, is like, you can disagree with what Democrats believe, and I do. I have quite a few differences, but Democrats don't want to, frankly, destroy democracy, or they haven't questioned election results on this broad level. The Democrats, bad policy is bad policy. Every, 4 or 8 years, we get a new president who we don't agree with. Big deal. That's how America works. So the question is does this country survive this? And so that's a decision that disaffected Republicans, or Republicans that are uncomfortable with Trump, are going to have to make. If policy is your end all be all, then they're probably going to, swallow it and vote for Donald Trump and figure out how to get along with that. If you do have a concern for the future of this country, like I do, I mean, look, when I was in Congress, I cared a lot about foreign policy, and I know what a struggling democracy looks like and how hard it is to come back when people denigrate the election system in that country, because that trust is something that you have to have among everybody. Well, if people decide that they care about the democracy, the Republicans will lose in a huge way. And I think, unfortunately, and I'm saying this as I guess, still a Republican, the unfortunate thing here is the Republican Party is going to have to lose because they haven't learned. Lake or somebody like that, Vivek Ramaswamy, going to take over after Donald Trump? Very well, maybe. Unless there are people that are willing to stay in the trenches and fight to save the GOP, but not by voting GOP, but by staying engaged and making sure the Republican Party loses when the Republican Party is pursuing the wrong goals.
And just before we conclude here, a little bit unrelated, but I mean, one of the options that has been presented, at least by some, is the idea of mounting some sort of another movement to take on both Donald Trump, but also Joe Biden, for that matter, because a lot of people are unhappy with his performance. And one of those things that has been presented is by people like Joe Manchin or Mitt Romney, even with the No Labels type organization. To what extent, though, are you concerned that some of these movements could just split the vote right down the middle, making it easier for, one candidate over the other to get elected?
It's a real concern. And look, I personally, if I could wave a magic wand and create a third party that was competitive, I would do it, because I actually think a centrist third party would work wonders in this country to bringing us back, frankly, where we need to be. And I think the more voices at the table, the better. You cut deals. It's a parliamentary system then at that point, which as a guy that never really fully got parliamentary systems, I certainly do now, and I see the benefits of them. So that's one thing. The problem is that movement needs to start not in a presidential election year. It has to start with elections to Congress and elections to local level, because the unique thing about the American system is you have to win 270 electoral votes. And so if Joe Manchin runs as a third party, look, I love the idea that people that don't feel like they have anybody to vote for now would feel like they had somebody to vote for. But all that would likely do is deny anybody 270 electoral votes. And in this country, we don't re-vote. We don't then go to a second ballot. Instead, the House of Representatives selects the president. And I think that in this divided moment, this is the wrong moment for a third-party movement. But I am extremely sympathetic to the fact that America, including myself, by the way, many Americans feel politically homeless. We feel like people without a home. And that's where we need to have a longer term focus, maybe 2 to 4 years down the road, to create a home for people that need it.
All right, we'll leave it there. Adam Kinzinger, thanks so much.
It was an honor to be with you. Thanks.